When you hear the name Cleopatra, a single image flickers in your mind: golden crowns, serpent shaped jewelry, kohl lined eyes that seem to pierce across centuries, the very symbol of beauty and seduction. But what if I told you that this image is a lie? What if I told you that behind the shimmering veil of legend was not a flawless goddess, but something far more terrifying, far more fascinating, a queen who rewrote reality itself? Tonight, we peel away the layers of myth and reveal the real Cleopatra, not the temptress of Roman imagination, but a master of power, fear, and survival. And I warn you now, what you're about to hear may forever change the way you think of Egypt's most iconic queen. Cleopatra VII. Philopator was not Egyptian, not truly. She was born in Alexandria, yes, but her blood was Macedonian Greek, flowing from the Ptolemaic dynasty, a family of outsiders who ruled Egypt like actors draped in borrowed costumes. For centuries, her ancestors spoke Greek, worshipped Greek gods, and locked themselves in cycles of incestuous marriages to keep their bloodline untouched by the land they ruled. They were strangers upon a throne, tolerated but never truly embraced. Yet Cleopatra was different. She was the first in her dynasty to break the script. She learned the Egyptian language, the only ruler of her line who bothered to speak in the tongue of the people. She adopted their gods, their rituals, and their myths, and in one daring move, she declared herself the living embodiment of Isis, the goddess of magic, healing, and eternal rebirth. But why would a queen born of conquerors abandon the traditions of her ancestors? The truth is far darker. Cleopatra knew that bloodlines were fragile and that crowns could slip like dust through grasping fingers. Her people saw her as foreign. To them, she was the face of their conquerors. And so, she forged a mask of divinity, weaving herself into the very fabric of their faith. To the Egyptians, she was no longer merely a ruler. She was divine, untouchable, eternal. Yet behind this sacred performance was a woman trapped in constant peril, forced to play goddess not out of vanity, but out of desperate necessity. Imagine the world she grew up in: a palace where family was not love, but a battlefield. Brothers were rivals, sisters were threats, and every smile might hide a blade. Cleopatra's childhood was not the storybook version you've seen in films. It was a labyrinth of whisperers, schemes, and betrayals. From the moment she was born, her fate was entwined with one unyielding law: survive, no matter the cost. And she learned early that survival required more than beauty. It demanded brilliance, calculation, and above all, ruthlessness. Plutarch, one of the few ancient voices who wrote close to her time, admitted the truth. Cleopatra's beauty was not extraordinary. She was not the radiant goddess of Hollywood, nor the perfect temptress of poetry. Her real weapon lay elsewhere. Her voice, they said, was like music. Her presence charged the air itself. She could speak 9 languages, mastering politics, philosophy, astronomy, and medicine. Knowledge was her dagger, words her armor. She disarmed men, not with painted eyes, but with an intellect sharp enough to slice through empires. Julius Caesar, Mark Antony, these titans of Rome, did not fall for her because of a fleeting glance. They fell because she made them believe they were standing in the presence of destiny. And yet, for all her intelligence, her throne was never safe. The shadows of her own blood circled her like vultures. At just 18, Cleopatra was forced into marriage with her brother Ptolemy III, a boy of 13. Do not be fooled by titles of king and queen. Their union was not love, it was survival. But the young boy king, manipulated by advisors who despised Cleopatra's independence, turned on her. Soon she was stripped of power, cast into exile, and left to wither away while her brother's faction ruled in her place. But Cleopatra was no victim. She was a strategist, and in one of the boldest acts of political theater in history, she smuggled herself back into Alexandria inside a rug unrolled at the feet of Julius Caesar himself. Think of the audacity. Alone, exiled, yet fearless enough to gamble everything on one chance encounter. Caesar did not see a desperate queen. He saw a woman who demanded to be heard, who carried herself as an equal in a world where women were dismissed as ornaments. She captivated him not with perfume or flattery, but with the gravity of her will. Together, Cleopatra and Caesar waged war against her brother's forces. The Nile ran with the echoes of battle, and in the chaos, Ptolemy III drowned, swallowed by the river he thought would protect him. Cleopatra returned to her throne, but her lesson was carved in blood. Power was never given, only taken, and she would take it again. Her next brother, Ptolemy XIV, became her new husband, but he too was nothing more than an obstacle, and obstacles were meant to be cleared. Soon he was gone, his death whispered to be the work of poison. Her sister Arsinoe, bold enough to challenge her claim, was dragged from a sacred temple and executed on Cleopatra's orders. To modern eyes, it may seem cruel, ruthless beyond imagination. But in her world, mercy was not compassion. Mercy was weakness, and weakness was death. At this point, dear listener, take a breath, because if this story feels like something out of dark fiction, know that it is not. It is history, passed down in fragments and whispers, each piece painting a picture of a woman who refused to be erased. Cleopatra's dynasty was collapsing around her. Rome's shadow stretched over Egypt like a hand tightening into a fist, and she knew, with bone-deep certainty, that the only way to survive was to bend history itself to her will. But before we continue deeper into Cleopatra's story, before we uncover the alliances, betrayals, and final downfall that would etch her name into eternity, I want to invite you into this journey with me. Stories like this, stories buried beneath centuries of myth, are what this channel is all about. If you feel the weight of Cleopatra's world pressing on you right now, if you want to hear the truth that history tried to silence, then I ask you, subscribe, not as a formality, but as a pact to keep digging into the shadows together, to keep unearthing the truths that the surface refuses to show, because the shadows only grow darker from here. Cleopatra may have regained her throne, but her survival demanded more than a crown. Soon, she would confront the storm of Rome itself, standing before generals whose legions could erase her kingdom in a heartbeat. And yet, she would not bow. Instead, she would weave them into her game, turning conquerors into allies and lovers into pawns. But the higher she climbed, the more treacherous the fall, and that fall is where the true horror begins. When we last left Cleopatra, she had clawed her way back to power. Her brother was dead, her throne reclaimed, her enemies silenced, yet the sands beneath her feet were never steady. Egypt may have been her kingdom, but Rome was the true master of the world. Its legions stretched like iron chains across continents, its generals carving their names into eternity. For Cleopatra, survival meant more than ruling her people. It meant stepping into the lion's den and convincing the lion not to bite. Her first great gamble was Julius Caesar, and for a time, it worked. Together, they forged an alliance of politics and power, one that secured her throne and gave her a son, Caesarion, little Caesar. To Cleopatra, he was more than a child. He was her weapon, her living claim to Rome itself. If Caesar acknowledged him, her bloodline could intertwine with the empire that threatened to consume her. But the tides of fate are merciless. In 44 BCE, Caesar fell beneath the daggers of his own senators, his blood staining the floor of the Roman Senate. Cleopatra's protector was gone, and with him, her shield against Rome's fury. The queen was once again alone in a world of wolves. But Cleopatra was no stranger to peril. She knew when to retreat and when to strike. Her eyes turned to Mark Antony, Rome's new power broker, a man of ambition and hunger. Their meeting has been retold in countless stories, cloaked in romance and seduction. Yet strip away the poetry, and what remains is calculation. Cleopatra did not approach Antony with a coy glance. She approached him as a sovereign, arriving in Tarsus aboard a golden barge, dressed as the goddess Isis, surrounded by music, incense, and splendor. It was not courtship, it was theater, a performance so magnificent that Antony could not ignore her, and it worked. Antony became her ally, her lover, her shield against the shifting tides of Roman politics. Together, they carved a partnership that threatened the balance of the world. To some, it looked like love. To others, it was a union of ambition, a pact between two predators circling the same prey. Cleopatra gave Antony children, wealth, and the promise of Egypt's resources. In return, Antony gave her protection, power, and a share of Rome's might. But power never comes without enemies. Back in Rome, Octavian, Caesar's heir, watched their union with cold, calculating eyes. To him, Cleopatra was not a queen. She was a threat, a foreigner, twisting a Roman general into her puppet. And so, the propaganda began. Rome whispered her name like a curse. Cleopatra the harlot, Cleopatra the seductress, Cleopatra the serpent who enslaved Antony's will. The truth, of course, was more complicated. Antony was not her puppet. He was her partner. But in politics, truth bends easily beneath the weight of fear. And then came Actium, the great battle that would decide the fate of empires. Antony and Cleopatra's forces against Octavian's fleet. The sea roared, the sky burned with smoke, and history trembled. But fate was cruel. Antony's navy faltered, Cleopatra's ships turned, and in the chaos, their alliance shattered. Defeat was not simply military, it was symbolic. Rome had won, and the world knew it. What followed was not the romance of poetry, but the slow descent of tragedy. Antony, broken by failure, saw his power disintegrate. Cleopatra, ever the strategist, weighed her options. Could she negotiate with Octavian? Could she offer him wealth, even herself, to preserve Egypt's sovereignty? For a moment, it seemed possible. Octavian entered Alexandria not as a destroyer, but as a conqueror playing his own performance. He promised mercy. He promised life. But Cleopatra was no fool. She could see the truth behind his words. Octavian wanted her alive, not as a queen, but as a spectacle, paraded in chains through Rome, humiliated before crowds, stripped of every shred of dignity. That she would never allow. In the dim chambers of her mausoleum, Cleopatra made her final choice. The details are veiled in mystery, woven in rumor and myth. Some say she clasped a venomous serpent to her breast. Others claim poison hidden in a vial slipped quietly onto her skin. However it happened, the result was the same. Cleopatra, the queen who defied empires, ended her life on her own terms. She chose death over humiliation, silence over spectacle. When Octavian entered her tomb, he found not a prisoner, but a corpse. Cleopatra had written the final line of her own story, and with her death, an era ended. Egypt, once a land of gods and pharaohs, became just another province beneath Rome's fist. Caesarion, her son, was executed, her dynasty extinguished. Her legacy, however, refused to die. Here lies the haunting truth. The Cleopatra we know today is not the woman who lived, but the woman Rome wanted us to remember. The Romans painted her as a seductress, a temptress who brought strong men to ruin. They crafted a legend of beauty and lust because that story was easier to tell than the reality of a brilliant, ruthless, politically masterful queen. For 2,000 years, that myth endured, shaping art, literature, and film. But behind the eyeliner and the golden crowns was a woman who understood the darkest secret of power, that survival often demands cruelty, that love can be wielded as a weapon, and that history itself can be bent, twisted, and stolen. And now, more than 2 millennia later, we still argue over who she truly was. Was Cleopatra a villain, stained with betrayal and blood? Was she a victim, crushed by the weight of Rome's propaganda? Or was she something else entirely? A mastermind who refused to bow, who chose to craft her own ending rather than let the world define her? As you sit here listening to the echoes of her story, ask yourself this: if the myths could bury the truth of Cleopatra for 2,000 years, how many other truths lie hidden beneath the sands of history, waiting for us to dig them up? The story of Cleopatra does not end with her death. It lingers like a shadow, whispering from the past, asking us to look closer, to doubt the tales handed down by victors. Because in the end, Cleopatra did not simply play history's game. She rewrote it, and in doing so, she forced the world to remember her, not as she was, but as she demanded to be seen. So tell me, after everything you've heard, who do you believe Cleopatra really was? An icon? A monster? A survivor? Or something far more unsettling? Proof that even in death, power can be eternal? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I want to know, when you hear the name Cleopatra now, what image lingers in your mind?